It felt like a memory the world had agreed to forget. Somewhere beneath the quiet hills of Neverland, past the rusted carousel and the empty gates, there was a door no one had opened in over a decade. Not family, not staff, not even the estate's own lawyers. When it finally cracked open, what stood behind it wasn't dust and silence. It was a piece of Michael Jackson no one had ever been allowed to see. The sealed vault of Neverland. In the years after Michael Jackson's passing in 2009, Neverland Ranch didn't just fall quiet, it seemed to fold in on itself. The Ferris wheels stopped turning. The zoo enclosures stood empty, their gates rusting shut. Visitors who once lined up for a glimpse of the king of pop's private paradise were replaced by silence, weeds, and the occasional caretaker walking the grounds like a ghost tending a graveyard. But beneath the main house, past a hallway few staff members were ever permitted to enter, there was a door that had never been opened since the day it was sealed. It wasn't marked on any public blueprint. It wasn't mentioned in estate inventories. For years, its existence was little more than rumor, whispered about by former employees, hinted at in interviews, dismissed by skeptics as urban legend. Some said it held unreleased recordings. Others believed it was a personal archive, a place where Michael kept the parts of himself the cameras never saw. A few darker theories suggested it held answers to questions that had followed him his entire life. No one knew for certain, because no one had ever gone inside. The man who built rooms within rooms. To understand the vault, you first have to understand the man who built it. Michael Jackson was, by every account from those closest to him, someone who lived in layers. The public saw the moonwalk, the glittering glove, the stadiums full of screaming fans. But behind that image was a man who spent much of his life constructing spaces where he didn't have to be Michael Jackson at all, spaces where he could simply exist. Neverland itself was one such space, a sprawling fantasy built to recapture a childhood that fame had quietly stolen from him. But even within his own sanctuary, Michael carved out smaller sanctuaries. Friends and collaborators often described him as someone who needed a room within the room, a place inside the place where even his most trusted circle couldn't follow. The vault, hidden and unlisted, appears to have been exactly that, the innermost layer of a man who had spent his whole life being watched. Those who worked closely with him during the final years of his life have spoken about his growing obsession with privacy. Legal battles, tabloid scrutiny, and the crushing weight of global fame had left him guarded in ways even his fans rarely understood. The vault, sealed years before his death, wasn't an afterthought, a final private line drawn between himself and the world, the door that resisted everything. When the estate's legal team authorized a full audit of Neverland's remaining structures in 2024, most expected the process to be routine. Old furniture, forgotten wardrobe pieces, maybe a few boxes of fan mail. No one expected to find a door. It was concealed behind a false wall in what had once been listed as a storage corridor, discovered almost by accident when a structural engineer noticed the wall's dimensions didn't match the original architectural plans. Behind it, reinforced steel, a biometric lock long dead from lack of power, and a secondary mechanical bolt system that even trained locksmiths struggled to identify. It took specialists nearly 2 full days to breach it. Cutting tools failed against the alloy frame. Attempts to bypass the biometric panel were fruitless, its internal circuitry deliberately fused. In the end, the door had to be manually drilled through its hinge points, a process one technician described as fighting something that was never meant to be opened again. When it finally gave way, the air that escaped was cold, stale, and untouched by over a decade of California summers. Flashlights swept across a room that looked less like storage and more like a shrine. Inside the first chamber, the outer chamber was modest in size, but every inch of it had been deliberately arranged. Along one wall stood a row of glass display cases, their interiors fogged with age, but their contents remarkably preserved. Inside were stage costumes, not the famous, publicly known outfits displayed in exhibitions around the world, but early prototypes. Hand-sewn jackets with unfinished embroidery, sequins only half applied, notes pinned to the fabric in what appeared to be Michael's own handwriting, adjustments and corrections scribbled in the margins like a sculptor endlessly refining a piece of art no one else was allowed to see yet. On a nearby shelf sat a row of reel-to-reel tapes, each labeled only with numbers, no titles. Analysts who later reviewed the archive believe these may contain early vocal takes and instrumental sketches, work that never made it past the demo stage. Whether the recordings amount to unreleased songs or simple studio experiments remains unconfirmed, but their careful preservation, climate-controlled shelving, hand-labeled with meticulous care, suggests they meant a great deal to the man who placed them there. At the center of the room stood a writing desk, untouched, a single lamp still positioned above it, as though its owner had only just stepped away. Sketchbooks lay stacked in neat piles filled with drawings of stage sets, elaborate costume designs, and what appeared to be conceptual sketches for a theme park attraction that never left the page. Margins were filled with notes about lighting cues, choreography counts, and small personal reminders that read more like a diary than a business plan. The second chamber. Beyond the first room, a narrow hallway led to a second, smaller chamber, one that felt distinctly different in purpose. Where the outer room had been about creation, this inner space felt about memory. The walls were lined with framed photographs, many never released publicly, candid images of Michael with his children, snapshots from Neverland's golden years, and photographs of collaborators and mentors who had shaped his early career. Unlike the polished, publicity-managed images the world had grown used to, these were unguarded. A man laughing mid-sentence, caught off guard by whoever held the camera. In one corner sat a small chest, its lid slightly ajar as though it had been opened one final time before the room was sealed. Inside were personal letters, several addressed to close family members, others seemingly written but never sent. A handful of children's drawings, carefully preserved in protective sleeves, suggested the room had also served as a quiet place to hold onto pieces of fatherhood that fame rarely allowed him to enjoy in peace. There was no gold record on display here, no trophies, no framed magazine covers. It was, by every appearance, the one room in Michael Jackson's entire estate that had nothing to do with being a star. The recordings, no one was meant to hear. Among everything uncovered inside the vault, it was the reel-to-reel tapes that generated the most quiet fascination among those given access to the archive. Audio engineers brought in under strict confidentiality agreements spent weeks simply stabilizing the aging magnetic tape before a single reel could be safely played. The equipment itself was outdated by decades, forcing technicians to source vintage playback machines, just to preserve the recordings without damaging them further. What they heard, according to those present, wasn't polished music. It was raw. Vocal warm-ups, half-finished melodies hummed into a microphone late at night, fragments of rhythm tapped out on what sounded like a tabletop rather than a studio instrument. There were false starts, quiet laughter between takes, and long stretches of silence where nothing happened at all except the faint hum of a room being lived in. It wasn't the sound of a superstar recording an album. It was the sound of a man thinking out loud, working through ideas with no audience in mind. One tape in particular stood out to those who reviewed it. A stripped-down piano sketch layered with a vocal melody that bore no resemblance to any released Jackson track. Whether it was ever intended to become a finished song, or simply existed as a private outlet for a restless creative mind, remains unknown. The estate has been careful not to draw conclusions, insisting that context matters more than sensational headlines, and that not every unfinished idea was meant to leave the room it was created in. A room that rewrote the timeline. Perhaps the most quietly significant find in the vault wasn't an object at all, but a date. Several of the sketchbooks and stage designs were dated years after the point most biographers assumed Michael had scaled back his creative output due to health and legal pressures. The handwriting, verified by document specialists familiar with his known correspondence, matched samples from significantly later in his life than expected. This detail alone forced a small but meaningful shift in how historians view his final years, rather than a period defined solely by exhaustion and retreat. The vault suggests a parallel narrative, one where, even as the public version of Michael Jackson grew quieter, the private one never stopped designing, imagining, and building toward ideas he may never have lived to complete. It paints the picture of an artist who wasn't slowing down creatively so much as retreating inward, choosing to create for no one but himself. What the discovery really revealed. When word of the vault's contents reached historians and estate archivists, the reaction wasn't the explosive tabloid frenzy some had anticipated. Instead, it was something quieter, a recalibration of how the public understood the man behind the myth. The unreleased sketches and stage designs painted the picture of an artist who never stopped creating, even in his most guarded private moments. The recordings, still unverified in content, hinted at a creative process far more intimate and unfinished than the polished perfection fans had come to expect from his official releases. And the personal photographs and letters revealed something rarely associated with global superstardom. A man simply trying to hold on to the small, human parts of his life that fame had made nearly impossible to protect. Rather than auctioning the contents or opening them to public exhibition, the estate made a deliberate choice. The vault would be catalogued, preserved, and sealed once more, this time not out of secrecy, but out of respect. Every item was carefully archived, its condition recorded, its story documented for future generations, but the vault itself would not become a tourist attraction or a commercial venture. The man behind the locked door, what the vault ultimately reveals, isn't a scandal or a secret meant to shock the world. It's a portrait of contradiction. A global icon who spent his life performing for millions, yet quietly built himself a space where no audience was allowed. A man whose art never stopped, even when the world wasn't watching. A father who kept his children's crayon drawings in a locked chest, not because they were valuable, but because they were his. The vault, much like the man who built it, resists easy explanation. It wasn't a hidden treasure chest of scandal, nor a simple storage room of forgotten memorabilia. It was something closer to a diary written in objects. Costumes half finished, songs half recorded, letters half sent, a life half lived in public and half guarded in private. For over a decade, that door remained closed, a final boundary between Michael Jackson the legend and Michael Jackson the man. And now that it's finally been opened, perhaps the most surprising discovery isn't what was inside the vault at all. It's the quiet reminder that even the most famous person on earth still needed one room, however small, that belonged only to him. If you had the chance to unseal a room someone spent their whole life protecting, would you open it? Or would you let it stay a mystery forever? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more hidden stories from the world's most private legends.